but I did find the Manhunt an extraordinary story from the very beginning. The first operation, arrest operation, specifically for the Hague War Crimes Tribunal, was called Operation Little Flower, which was a sort of pickup team, a mixed multinational team under the UN flag, which is in a way was that showed everything, all the best that the UN can be. It was a group of people brought together who's serving a common mandate. It was a diplomat general, an American diplomat general called Jack Klein, lives in this town, a American prosecutor, Clint Williamson, a British Bobby from Stratford-on-Avon, a Czech homicide detective, and a Polish special forces unit. And they concocted this elaborate sting operation to lure one of the war criminals over the border so that he could be arrested. And they did so pretty much without the knowledge or the approval of their own governments. And this act of, well, slightly maverick act opened the floodgates, because until then, NATO, who were in Bosnia, didn't want to get involved. They called it mission creep, to go after the war criminals. They were there, they said, to keep the peace, and they don't want to do anything else. After that, it became much harder to make the argument that it's far too dangerous for our troops, because this was, you know, a bunch of UN officials and some untried, unknown Polish soldiers. So they set up a joint operation called Amber Star in Stuttgart. The US, UK, France, Germany, Netherlands, and the original idea was to have a big multinational sweep and pick up everyone pretty much at the same time, involving going in to Pale, which was the Bosnian Serb headquarters, with sort of guns blazing. And it was never clear to me whether they actually meant to do this, or they created an operation that would be so scare the politicians that they would cancel it. But it was never put to the test, because the whole thing was torpedoed by an espionage and sex scandal that came to be known as the Gourmelon affair, after Hervé Gourmelon, who was a French major, whose job it was to go up and down the road from Sarajevo to Pale, see the Bosnian Serbs, and the CIA became convinced that the flow of information was going the wrong way, and that he was giving away far more information than he was collecting from the Karadzic circle. So the CIA complained about him, whereas Clark complained about him. He was recalled to Paris and debriefed, but the French hierarchy sent him back and kind of gave a kind of Gallic shrug, and it occurred, I think, to the U.S. intelligence officers on the ground that maybe this wasn't an individual act, that it was a very French form of force protection, that they would let the Serbs know, we'll be going in and having a sweep, and we'll be looking for some of your guys, so if you don't want any trouble, you might want to stay out of that area. But the end result was the same. But Gourmelon ended up leaving Sarajevo eventually, because one night a young woman came into a police station in Sarajevo, complained that she'd been sexually assaulted quite violently by him, and this was presented to the French generals on the spot, and he was out within hours, leaving his property, his clothes and possessions behind him. Whether he was set up or whether this was something he did remains unclear, but the end result was he was out, and the Franco-American military and intelligence relations were very much soured for the following years. And after that, Amber Star didn't really count for anything. Everyone went their own way. Everyone did things in their own zones. And the British started off, and they did about a dozen arrests in their zone, bringing with them their kind of rough-edged techniques that they had perfected in Northern Ireland. And then the Dutch, who were operating under the weight of guilt of having been the soldiers who were supposed to have protected Srebrenica. Then you had the US, who learnt manhunting techniques there that they would take on into the war on terror. And you had the Germans, who went into action for the first time in this manhunt, for the first time since the Second World War, and took their first casualties since the Second World War in this manhunt. And then finally the French, the most reluctant participants, whose first time out turned out to be a real disaster. They killed the guy and almost killed a bunch of kids who were traveling with him, but then went on to capture one of the biggest prizes of all,